What's up, everybody? This is your boy, Dr. Peter Watts Jr., and this is the very first installment of a new podcast that I'm hosting called Sacred Insights. My name is Dr. Peter Watts. I am a entrepreneur, innovator, minister from Los Angeles. And I really wanted to start this podcast series because I've been doing a lot of reading and studying after my dissertation work had been published. And now I am taking all that I have researched and found and learned and experienced and really want to share it with the world. And I don't know who will actually watch any of this or even listen to any of this, but this is just something that I do as a sacred meditation and exercise to get out all the ideas and thoughts and things that are swirling around in my ADD head to get it out on paper and then to get it out into the world. And so, again, welcome to Sacred Insights, where, again, we explore the profound themes of scripture and their relevance to our daily lives. It's really looking at our daily lives and how we interact in the world with our faith and our work, and how does scripture even give us a compass for directional purposes in the places that we are being led by the Spirit. And so, again, my name is Dr. Peter Watts, and today we're going to dive into the rich symbolic world of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter number 2, and the idea of chaotic waters. And this idea of chaotic waters is a theme that resonates deeply with both the ancient world in the ancient Near East and in our modern spiritual journeys. And I must also add that this comes off of the heels of me reading and listening to other podcasts like the Bible Project and reading dissertations and seminal works from different folks around the country and around the world, for that matter, who really study the ancient Near East and study ancient indigenous groups as they look at the world and how we interpret scripture today. And so that's again the kind of the reason why I really started wanting to do this podcast, because there was just a lot that was being said that I was reading that was also in my own work that resonated with me and that overlapped. And I said, hey, let me share some of my doctoral work along with some of the things that are already out in the world, seeing how they are aligned with each other and how it could help those who may want to go deeper in their studies and in their readings and in their understanding of scripture and how it actually impacts their lives today. So, with that said, let's begin at the very first words of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, which opens up with this dramatic scene. And it opens up with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Very familiar passage, very familiar text in the very beginning of Genesis chapter 1. And here we're introduced to what I call, or what has been called, the chaotic waters. And the chaotic waters is that deep in the Hebrew people, in the Hebrew language. It's the word is tehom, and these waters represent disorder. It represents chaos. It represents this formless void. In Hebrew, we call it the tehu vivohu, and the untamed potential of creation. So, for the ancient world, water was often a symbol of chaos and danger. And when you think of how uncontrollable the seas can appear, it's depths are unknown, its waves are relentless. And so this in this text in Genesis, this chaotic imagery wasn't unique to the Bible. It was part of ancient cultures, and how ancient cultures saw water as a force of primordial disorder. And so what makes Genesis 1 remarkable, though, is that it introduces a God who is sovereign over these waters. And it's not that God is battling and fighting with these waters like some of the other ancient myths and ancient myth creations and other cultures suggest, but in this Hebrew text in Genesis, it shows how God effortlessly brings these chaotic waters into order. And so I love the imagery here, the imagery of the Spirit of God hovering like a bird, or perhaps or a mother hen that protects her chicks. And so God's presence doesn't flee from the chaos, but here in Genesis, God moves directly into the chaos. It's this formless void that God begins to speak and to create and to separate light from darkness and sky from sea and land from water. And so here's the key takeaway. The key takeaway is that God isn't afraid of chaos. In fact, he transforms it into something beautiful. And this should give us hope, because all of us have chaotic waters in our lives in one way or another. There are these seasons of uncertainty and these seasons of fear and these seasons of struggle. But Genesis 1 reminds us that God is not absent in those moments, that his spirit hovers or broods, ready to bring order, ready to bring purpose, and ready to bring beauty to our chaos. And so when we think about Genesis chapter 1, we can't talk about Genesis chapter 1 without then going to the second chapter of Genesis, which is Genesis chapter 2. And so now I want to talk about how we go from chaos to order, and from chaos to order, from order to life. I'm going to say that again. We're going to go from chaos to order, and then order to life. So as we move to Genesis chapter 2, here we zoom in from this cosmic stage to a more intimate setting. And now we're going to bring in the Garden of Eden. And so while Genesis 1 emphasizes God's power in creating order from chaos, Genesis 2 focuses on the beauty and abundance of God's creation. So interestingly, the waters in this chapter are different from the waters that form from chapter 1. So instead of chaotic seas that we see in chapter 1, in chapter 2, when Eden is created, we find rivers that are flowing out of Eden that are nourishing the earth. So we go from chaotic waters to waters that are flowing to sustain life. And so in Genesis chapter 2, it says, now a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became four rivers. And notice the contrast. In Genesis 1, the waters were wild and chaotic and formless and void. But in Genesis 2, they're life giving and purposeful. And so the river flowing from Eden becomes a symbol of God's provision and God's presence to sustaining life and connecting it to creation. And so there's this profound theological pattern here where God transforms chaotic waters into order by bringing rivers of blessing. And it's the same water. It's not different waters. It's the same water, but these waters have been reordered. These waters have been redirected and made fruitful. So in Eden, water is no longer a threat, but it becomes a source of life. And this reminds me of the Psalms, in the 46th number of Psalms in chapter 4, which says, there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling places of the Most High. Genesis 2's rivers imagery anticipates this. It points forward to how God's presence will continue to sustain and renew his creation. And then we have these chaotic waters in our lives. But now I want to give you this theological reflection that I've been wrestling with for the past week. Because it's good to know these things, but the reality is, what does it all mean for us today? What does it have to do with my life? How does this impact me as I'm reading the Genesis account, as I'm reading the Genesis narrative and seeing the symbolism and the metaphors that the writer is using in Genesis? What does this have meaning for in my life today? And so we can reflect on the spiritual significance now of the chaotic waters and the rivers of Eden. And so, first, the chaotic waters reminds us of the challenges that we all face in life. As I said before, we often feel overwhelmed, and so it feels like we're treading water, barely staying afloat. But maybe it's, again, financial stress. It could be relational conflict that you're having. It could be a deep sense of uncertainty that you have about your future and with your job or with your career or with school. Or with your marriage or with your kids, anything. But chaos in all its forms can feel terrifying. It can feel chaotic. But here's the good news. The good news is that God specializes in turning our chaos into order. Just as he hovered or brooded over the waters in Genesis 1, God is present in our lives in that darkness, which is not a darkness of something that's bad, but a darkness of being still and contemplation, where you can hear God's voice or you can feel God's spirit move or hover over. You can feel his presence and God ready to speak light and peace into our hardest moments. And second, the rivers of Eden reminds us of God's provision, which means no matter how chaotic life may feel, God's ultimate plan is to lead us to a place of nourishment and peace, like a garden, if you will, where his presence flows like a river. And this doesn't mean that the journey is going to be easy at all. Think of the Israelites coming across the Red Sea. That journey was not easy. Those waters were chaotic, the Red Sea, but those waters were parted and they still had to walk through them. And sometimes God doesn't take us out of the chaos, he just leads us through it. And while he's doing it, he's transforming us through the process. And then there's one more layer to this story. The theme of chaotic waters runs throughout the entire Bible, and it finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. So I want you to think about Jesus walking on water in the Gospels. He literally treads upon chaos, showing his authority over it. Or consider his baptism in the Jordan River, where he enters the water not because it needs cleansing, but to identify with humanity and begin his mission of redemption, understanding that we all are in these chaotic waters of life. And then lastly, at the end of the book of the Bible, in Revelations chapter number 22, that last chapter of the Bible, we find a vision of a river flowing from God's throne, bringing healing to the nations. It's a connection back to Genesis in the rivers that flowed out of Eden. It's as if the waters of chaos have been fully transformed and redeemed into streams of life and restoration. So here's some practical takeaways for you. As we wrap up, I want you to consider these takeaways from our discussion today. Number one, trust God in the chaos. Just as he hovered over the waters in Genesis chapter 1, God is present in your uncertainty, working to bring order and beauty. Number two, look for the rivers, meaning even in difficult times, ask, where is God providing for me? What are the rivers of blessings in my life? We're in this season of Thanksgiving, what we call a season of thankfulness and gratefulness. Sometimes we've got to stop and ask ourselves, where are the rivers of blessings in my life? And then lastly, follow the flow of the Spirit. The Spirit of God moves through the chaos. He moves, or the Spirit moves to create and sustain life. So how can you align yourself with God's work in your life and in your community? So thank you for joining me today on Sacred Insights as we explore Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and the theme of chaotic waters. And I want you to remember, no matter how overwhelming life feels, the same God who brought order to the waters of creation is at work in your life today. So until next time, may you find peace in the midst of chaos and rivers of grace flowing through your journey. Again, my name is Dr. Peter Watts, and this is Sacred Insights. Peace.